My name is Niamh Moriarty. I work collaboratively with another artist, Ruth Clinton. We're presenting a body of work at Galway City Museum called A Collection of Disarticulated Bones. I've worked with Ruth collaboratively for over a decade, and a lot of our work is video, performance or text-based, and a lot of it has, text is really important to the work and narrative, so the work is always about storytelling, and the storytelling often comes from the conversation between me and my collaborator, because we're always talking out the ideas and shutting down the bad ones. And this body of work in particular, we're trying to engage more voices outside of our practice. So there'll be 3 documentary videos in the installation, and each of them is an invited speaker telling their own story. They're 3 really different stories, but I'm going to tell you about one in particular because we collaborated with Leahy, who is the curator of emigration at the National Museums of Northern Ireland. So he works predominantly in Omagh at the Ulster American Folk Park, and the Ulster American Folk Park is an open-air museum that has real buildings from famine-era Ireland and antebellum America. The American buildings were brought stone by stone and brick by brick across the Atlantic back to Ireland. So they're all stories of Irish emigrants. And there's one particular house with a dark history that we were interested in. It's a red brick home. So it's very unusual for that era. It's from rural Tennessee, where there wouldn't have been brick factories like there would have been in the cities. So you have Irish Catholic settlers going over from Ulster. This is the Rogan family house, so specifically an Irish Catholic emigrant family from Ulster who are building and replicating these kind of empirical colonial buildings. So they want to have a house that looks like the Dutch houses or the British houses that you would see in the big cities there. So this house is a big red brick house, and it was built using slave labour, and it's a much more laborious process than building red brick house, say, in a city where there is, a brick factory, basically. So all of the earth would have been dug out of the riverbed, and each individual brick would have been handmade. And fast forward to the early 2000s, when they moved this house over to Ireland, they reassembled it. They numbered each brick and they reassembled it exactly as it stood in Tennessee. But a couple of the bricks had little marks or indentations in them, and they took them out for preservation, but they were sitting in an archive box essentially, and Liam showed them to us, and we assumed that they'd have handprints of an adult who was involved in making the house, but there's a handprint of a child and a footprint of a child who was just in the location where the bricks would have been drying at the time. It's in the 1840s, but looking further into the history of the house, there was no children belonging to the family of the house there at the time, so it's pretty safe to assume that this was an enslaved child, either involved in the building of this house or just present on the plantation at the time. So it's a really dark history, but at the same time, this work is about uncovering and telling histories of Ireland and Irish complicity in systems of racism and systems of colonialism that we don't always talk about or we don't always tell. And in America, I think people are quite comfortable with confronting those histories. Some people are comfortable with confronting those histories, but in Ireland, we don't always tell those stories about ourselves. So this felt like those hand and footprints, they're like relics to us. It's like they've come, it's just such a coincidental series of events that brought them here to Ireland to kind of reveal themselves in a museum context. So we showed them at an exhibition last year, and now they're on permanent display at the Ulster American Folk Park, and it's just a kind of incredible piece of history to see a maker's mark like that in the brick. I think they're really powerful museum objects, and it was brilliant for us to get to work with Liam on, showing them to the public basically, and to get his expertise on the house and how it would have been built and how it would have been brought over, and that kind of conservation is something that we're really interested in terms of storytelling. Like, how does a museum tell the story of Ireland and the Irish in America? How I would hope viewers would see and take in the work at Galway City Museum would be in the context of this beautiful exhibition that Michelle's put together. So it's a huge privilege for us to get to show amongst our peers and amongst so many other artists who are dealing with these really urgent topics, so that the works aren't just in isolation. They get this privileged position of being amongst the museum objects and inserting a different narrative. So, you know, some folk stories, stories of community action are in there in our video works, and then they get to sit beside like museum objects that might have been in the collection for 100 years. So that's, I think the context is really special to get to talk about storytelling in a museum context where, you know, this is where we tell the story of our history. So it's just a really charged space, and I think museums can be, you know, there can be tension in a museum as well in terms of like how do you represent the truth accurately. So the video works we have are people's specific story, like from their own perspective, from their own experience. Each story contains not just someone's like individual interpretation of what they saw, but like, you know, I might have seen something in the sky. I saw an apparition in the sky. This is one of the stories. But I know I saw it because my friend saw it too. Or for a second story, there's this a set of 13 skulls that were, they weren't buried, they were in a sort of an ossuary on Inishbofin Island. So they were out in an old chapel on the island, and they were stolen by Trinity College researchers who were practicing craniology on people in the west of Ireland, which is a totally debunked scientific practice, but they were trying to find this sort of like, what is this like quintessential like indigenous Irish, I guess, ethnicity. Again, it's totally debunked, but at the time, and you can see it, at the time people collected skulls and these were taken and they were written about in a diary as stolen, and they were brought to Trinity College where they were living in the old anatomy department for 133 years, and the people on the island, in particular Marie Coyne, who we got to speak to, launched a decade-long campaign to bring them back, and they brought them back last year and buried them. So it's really special again for that work and for Marie's story to be shown here in a museum context in Galway. It's the Galway story essentially, and it's a West of Ireland story.
It's time to return the skulls to their chosen place of rest. May they rest in peace soon.
For me and Ruth, participating in TULCA is just a really exciting and special time because we get to exhibit alongside so many other artists that we wouldn't normally be exhibiting at, you know, in the same context as. So a really nice example is Shani Barnes' Beautiful Sticks. You know, Shani is such a beautiful storyteller, and there's other artists like John Carson and Michael Holly who are incredible storytellers with their own mediums. So whether it's performance or video, everyone has their own approach to the medium and to the question of the environment, but also like how much our culture is connected to the environment.
My name's Stuart Whipps. I'm an artist from Birmingham, UK. For TULCA, I've made a new version of a kind of series of performances that I've been developing since 2022. So I've been working at the Geology Museum at University of Galway to try and tease out kind of narratives in the objects there in the museum and how they connect to other things in the world along huge time frames, so across 4 billion years. The themes of the wider festival really appeal to me in the sense that I'm always working with existing materials and objects, so there's a direct idea of salvage within that, of kind of reclaiming materials, but also I guess the metaphorical idea of that, of how you might salvage stories and narratives that are bound up in those materials as well. So always in my work, I'm trying to do things that I don't really know how to do and work in environments that are often very alien to me. I think there's something really productive about being a novice in any given situation as an artist for a few reasons. I think one, there's something often when you're an artist going into an environment, there's a danger that you could be placed on a bit of a pedestal. There's somebody coming in who knows what they're doing. If you're within an environment where you're very obviously the novice in that situation, I think it can flip the hierarchy, and that can do some really, just produce very different interactions in terms of the things that you're doing and the things that you're making. I also think in the best examples of this, there's a symbiotic relationship in the things that you are bringing as an artist can actually help to shift and change the way that perhaps people feel about their own discipline. So here in Galway, where I've been working at the James Mitchell Geology Museum and working with Dr. John Murray with the collection there, I hope that John would say that actually having me come in and pick out things that are perhaps they're not the objects a geologist might be interested in. They're things that I'm interested in as an artist that are, dusty in the bottom cupboard that no one's been taken out. I've also started to shift the way he sees the potential in that collection and how it changes the way that you might interpret things within the museum, but also might change the way you're teaching with some of these objects and materials as well. I'm always happy if people just go and see it. So first and foremost, just people spending time. There are a couple of things that, again, are pleasing to me about this, is that the Geology Museum is really under-resourced. So by having this exhibition there as part of TULCA means that audiences will get an opportunity to experience the museum in a way that they haven't done before, just by the nature of it being open and being invigilated. And I guess what I'm looking for is that visitors are able to experience the same things I did as an artist, that curiosity, that you're able to kind of draw out connections between objects in the museum. What I've done is placed my photographs and a film work within that space to also kind of tease out these tangential connections and these stories across the way. The performance in some ways is a little more didactic, and it kind of works as a sort of performance lecture where I'm telling the audience some things. But for me, the success will be if, even though I'm telling you some like very specific bits of information, the nature of the collaged kind of visuals that go with that also enable you as a viewer to kind of go off on your own journey while that's taking place. So yeah, that's what I'm looking for, or that's what I'm trying to do always. In a way, the work is about this scrabbling attempt to try and understand what the world is and kind of what my place within the world might be. I don't think that's answerable. I want the viewer to go along with that, with also no pressure to kind of feel that you have to kind of understand like every connection within the work. It's this journey of discovery.
I'm Julie Morrissy. I'm a poet based in Dublin, but I also work in the visual arts setting. So I bring poetry into gallery spaces and visual arts contexts. And the work that I'm presenting in TULCA is called Disappearing Acts. And it is going to be a storytelling circle about Bunreacht na hÉireann, the Irish Constitution, particularly Article 45 of Bunreacht na hÉireann, which is about the principles of social policy. And we're going to think about the Bunreacht through stories and myths and folklore that have been passed down through generations. I'm a law graduate originally, a long time ago. So I've been reading and studying the Bunreacht for, a couple of decades now. And this kind of all comes together in a project of mine which is ongoing called Certain Individual Women, which looks at Irish law over the first 100 years of the state through poetry, through the stories of myself and my grandmother. So that's kind of the basis of this project and my interest in the Bunreacht. But I've done a number of things around the Bunreacht as well. Earlier this year, I did an event with Professor Maeve Harding at UCD Law School called Bunreacht Aloud, where we did a collective public reading of the Bunreacht from start to finish. In TULCA 2020, I had an installation of my piece titled Positions Gendered Male in Bunreacht na HÉireann, 1937 Constitution of Ireland, and that was installed in a vinyl installation in the Ompus Gallery, and it kind of explores how imbalanced the Bunreacht is in terms of gender delineation and kind of how deeply embedded that gender discrimination is in our legal structures. So Disappearing Acts follows on from this kind of study of the Bunreacht. And in particular, Article 45 is of real interest to me because it is, as I said, it's the principles of social policy. So it's kind of like the best parts of Ireland you could imagine. It's values driven. It represents, I think, ideas of Ireland that are really positive and forward thinking and very collective. But it has no legal weight. So even though it's in the Constitution, it's not cognizable. So you cannot bring the government to court, for example, over Article 45. And I'm very interested in how those values were important enough to make it into the Bunreacht and into the written text, but not important enough that they could be enforceable legally. TULCA represents a real opportunity for me as a poet to work in a visual art space, and I had a really great experience in 2020 working with Sarah Brown and an equally great experience working with Michelle Horrigan this year. It allows me to imagine my practice in different spaces and in different ways that can be different to a poet or like a kind of a literature context. One of the things I wanted to do here was to experiment a little bit with a kind of a live setting of storytelling. I work in a very collaborative way, which TULCA is excellent for. Joining me in the storytelling circle is Adam Hanna, who is a lecturer in Irish literature and the founder of the Irish Network for the Legal Humanities, co-founder with Eugene McNulty, and Sinead Mercier, who's also at UCD Law. And so Sinead and Adam are going to kind of help me ground the circle, but it will be very participatory, very collaborative, and I find that TULCA is a really great atmosphere for that because it's a group festival. It's a lot of involvement from people in Galway, from the city, and so it kind of provides me a good springboard to try something new in my practice and to kind of bounce off all of that collaborative energy. I think that Michelle Horrigan is thinking about kind of collective ideas through the Salvage Agency. She's thinking about kind of the public good and values that bring us together as a society and things that need to be protected in Irish society. And that's really what Article 45 is about at its core. It's about protecting material resources. It's about protecting the public from commercial exploitation. It's about health and well-being. And so I think it fits in really well with what Michelle is kind of thinking through in the broader themes of the exhibition. I'm really excited to do this because I haven't done this particular type of work before. This is my first time kind of conceiving of a storytelling circle. And it's going to be really participatory, I hope. It's really inviting people in to connect with the Bunreacht in a way that is personal through storytelling. And I want to think about how values circulate in Irish society. So there's no need for anyone to have any familiarity with the Bunreacht or with Irish law or with Article 45. It's a kind of a loose thinking through how the values in 45 might have existed before the Constitution, like in pre-independence Ireland, and then how those values continue to circulate in Irish society and how they've been strengthened or diluted. And so I'm really interested to hear from people how they think in the moment about how these values maybe permeate their lives and how they've been passed down through stories. So it's really important to me that people are kind of sharing in this experience and that it's a real figuring out for me. Like the circle is going to be me figuring things out about the Bunreacht. I hope other people may be connecting to the Bunreacht in ways that they haven't thought about before. So it's a true kind of collaboration and an experiment that I'm very excited to do here at TULCA.
My name is Bryony Dunne. I'm a visual artist and filmmaker. My work here at TULCA is called Drifting, and it's been presented at the Museum of Marine Biology and Zoology. It's been shown within the permanent collection in the museum, so that's quite exciting. I've positioned it in one of the diorama little cabinets boxes that's there. It's quite a privilege to have the work positioned right beside the original collection, and as a way also to bring audiences to the museum, and and to have that relationship between my work and the existing work that's in the museum. So the last year and a half I've started to work with sculpture, mainly ceramic as a material to work with sculpture, and the work was produced on a residency in the Netherlands at the European Ceramic Workshop. It's black ceramic, and part of it is a kind of like a green porcelain with photographs printed onto it, so it's very, very thin, the little photographic pieces. They're kind of like image transfers. It's interesting that it's still kind of like an active education space, whereas when I was installing the work today, there was a class in there, and this engagement with students, and it's an education space, and how these the Blaszka collection, how these little sea creatures were used for educational purposes. And my work, I suppose, I see it as this kind of like fact-based fiction. It's based on a myth, the myth of the goose barnacle, on how this author believed that these birds hatched from this type of barnacle, called it a barnacle tree. It was this kind of myth that explained an eggless reproduction of this bird. And people at that time, which was around the 11th century, they had a misunderstanding of bird migration. And even though these birds migrated to Canada every year, the author it was an attempt to try and understand where these birds went, but also their reproductive systems. So this myth was produced, and it was really up until the kind of the mid 19th century that myth was kind of rolled out, and I think it's quite interesting in how this work is then kind of put in a space where that it's used to educate, but it's kind of like it distorts and kind of comments on that process of understanding and forming knowledge. And when a curator has the ability to kind of draw a show like this and kind of web together all these different connections on how works kind of fit together and how they relate together and how they speak to one another, I think just going back to my work on how I draw this kind of an extension of this myth of the goose barnacle to this story of a US space rocket that failed to launch back in 2015, and it was washed up ashore on an island in Cornwall, in Scilly, and attached to it was all these goose barnacles, and it drifted with the same current. These goose barnacles were attached to the spaceship, and the fact that the spaceship came from Florida and it circulated with the currents, and just the kind of the absurdity and how the kind of then the story of the expansion of knowledge and this desire to acquire knowledge, of this kind of acquiring knowledge from outer space, whereas Gerard of Wales from the 11th century was going to Ireland to acquire knowledge, but how all these kind of connections are weaved and webbed together, which across time and space, which is in many ways what a kind of like a a curator of an exhibition like this is doing. It's kind of weaving all these stories and people together in some type of beautiful way. So.
My name is John Carson. I originally come from Carrickfergus in the north of Ireland, but I've been living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the last 18 years. I'm presenting 2 older works and one new work. 2 older works are one which is based on a song by Johnny Cash. It's called I'd Walk From Cork to Larne to See the 40 Shades of Green. The other work is American Medley, which is a musical tour of the USA based on visiting 50 places which are famed in song and looking at the kind of reality of those places compared to the mythology that's in the song. Country road, take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia, Mountain Mama, take me home, country road. So both of those works are kind of like a form of critique of tourism. The new work I'm presenting is kind of related to tourism. It's called Carson Street. Carson's my second name, and in Pittsburgh, where I live now, there's a Carson Street. And I wondered how Carson Street in Pittsburgh got its name. So I'm the Irishman who goes to America looking for his ancestors. So it's a kind of tourism in reverse.
One question. Yeah, do you know where Carson Street got its name?
No idea.
Neither do we. We're trying to figure it out.
I wouldn't even know.
No idea.
No idea.
There's a lot of vox pop there. Then I talk to people who are historians from the city of Pittsburgh who might know a little bit more about the subject. Then I visit some archives, and the archivists, become part of the work. So all of those people are characters in the film. Their insights, their humor, their personalities lend a lot to the work. So it's not just about me, it's about, my interaction with those people and what comes back from those people. So I consider it to be a collaborative work. In my mind, the fact that they're showing a work that I made in 1978 and a work that I made in 1983, they've salvaged 2 of my works from the past with the thought that they still have relevance today. So that's how I feel it relates to the salvage theme. I would hope that people would find amusement in the work, but also I'd hope that it makes them maybe look at some things a little bit differently, things that they're used to, things that are kind of everyday, what we kind of see in our everyday experience, but maybe the artwork will get people to look a little bit closer or a little bit differently at what they might take for granted otherwise. I've been living in America for 18 years, so I'm really glad of any opportunity to be back in Ireland and also to show work in Ireland. I also think that there's particular aspects of Irish humour that I would hope are informing my work and also informing people's reception of the work. So I think there's an Irish audience can see nuances in the work perhaps that others might not see. What I like about being in a festival like this is that, the sharing of the spaces with other artists, getting to meet other artists, getting to see the work of younger artists, because I've been around for a while now, but every time I come to Ireland, I'm curious to see the work of younger artists, emerging artists, and I think this is an interesting combination of older artists, some people who've been working for decades, and some other younger artists, who are just kind of coming through at this point in time. So that's exciting.
So my name is Catriona Leahy, and the work I have here at TULCA
are a series of light boxes, bog syntax, and a piece called Bog Thing, Assembly for the Symbiocene. And the work emerges from a kind of a long-standing interest, I suppose, and investigation of the peatlands in the Midlands of Ireland that have become degraded due to industrial extraction. And I've explored this site through largely through the process of analog photography, so exploring this kind of relationship between the black box of the camera or the dark room as a space of kind of latent potential, but also as a space of where things are suspended in time, and also the peatlands then as a space of preservation. I think of it as an archive. I think of it as a repository that holds, information of times past. And in the TULCA festival, the work here is more focused, I suppose, through the process of digital, where I'm again exploring, I suppose, a means of mapping or surveying the landscape through another lens, and that is LiDAR technology, albeit I'm using quite a layman's LiDAR, which is to say that it's using an iPad device to 3D scan the bog. So it's very much a kind of a close reading, I would say, where I am standing in the landscape. My movements pivot and turn and move with the LiDAR iPad scanning app. And so the work kind of emerged then from that process, where I noticed the resulting image, the resulting three-dimensional image, was quite akin to that of an amphitheatre or a forum, or like a parliament or a space where people might gather. And it led me to think about the landscape and its agency or not in the fashioning of policy and decision making. And so the work really speculates or provokes a question to the viewer about what agency might the landscape hold still, and in our time of kind of ecological collapse, I suppose. And so it invites viewers to think different forms of kind of connecting with and communicating with the landscape. I think it's, the TULCA festival provides an incredible kind of space in which various different art practices and forms of knowledge and intersections of knowledge and different disciplines can overlap and are brought into dialogue with one another. And so I think the Salvage Agency, and in particular, the events that kind of coincide with the festival, provide those platforms for people to kind of really understand, our place in our agency in maybe thinking through, this time of crisis, and I feel with the work that's presented in the different locations, brings those kind of intersections and those dialogues together. I think what I'd like people to take away from the work here at TULCA, and in particular from my work, is, and maybe it's suggested in the titling as well, but also visually. But bog syntax, for example, suggests this kind of sense of language or code. The three light boxes kind of take the form of a taxonomy, if you like, so again, kind of connecting to that notion of the archive and the idea of the bog as one incredible ledger that holds and accounts for our history and the bad, the good and the ugly. And I think the work, I hope, might prompt people to think that, well, the landscape or the and ecologies kind of hold their own language that we have yet maybe to decipher, and to think about what ways we might listen to or speak to the land in a more connected and relational way. And I think with the 3D scan of the bog, that very much kind of resembles that of an amphitheatre, that connects to those ideas of forum, of gathering, of assembly, to again, prompt the viewer to think about what ways can we act together and relationally to understand our world better and understand how we might move forward.
My name is Áine Phillips and I'm an artist based here in Galway, and I've been involved in TULCA a few times over the years actually, so it's great to be back. And my piece in the festival, it's a small packaging box for packaging material goods or things we might buy online, maybe that are sent to us, and inside are some packaging materials and a small monitor, and on it is a video called The Secret. I shot the video in the mid-2010s on the back road to the big giant superstore IKEA in Dublin. And the little road I'm driving on, it's more like a country road really. It's filled with all kinds of rubbish and detritus that have just been dumped there. No judgment about who did the dumping, but there was a massive amount of dumping along that little road. And it's just the contrast between the fantasy of IKEA, the beautiful perfectness of the dream that IKEA promises, and then this hidden secret, the underbelly of that material promise that we're given in the fantasy of the perfect dream life. And then, the underbelly is all of the detritus of our material lives, all of this stuff that we produce and we use and we consume and we buy, and where does it end up? It ends up as waste in our environment. And so this particular film shows that very vividly and very explicitly. The fact that I found all this stuff there really was, I felt it was a perfect metaphor for our society and these fantasies of the material consumer world that we all are fed and that we can't resist really. You know, we use all these material objects, but really they all just turn to dust in the end, in this brief span of our own material lives as well. I would have been involved in TULCA from the very beginning as a helper, as a volunteer in the early days. 2002 was the first edition of TULCA, and I was then in TULCA myself as an artist, and I was also curating TULCA as well over the years. On a number of occasions I curated live events, live performance events, because a lot of my work is performance art. But I do make video work too, so it's great to be able to show the video work here. I'm just so proud to be part of TULCA, that a festival that I think is a really important contribution to the cultural life of Galway City, and it's brought up the level of cultural engagement with visual art in Galway so much over the years, and it's really developed the sector of visual art in Galway, and it's given us all in the community, the visual art community in Galway, something to really look forward to every year in terms of the sociability of it all, and meeting artists from all over Ireland and all over the world, but also seeing international work of a very high standard and national work of a very high standard, and placing ourselves in that context as well. So it's been very good for our ambitions as a visual art community here in Galway. I feel like my work engages with environmentalism and environmental action. I feel like my work is activist, and that would go for all of my work over the years really. Since I was a young girl in college in the 80s, I made work, feminist, very strong feminist work, and always thought about our place in the world as women, as human beings on this planet as well. And so I think it really fits in with the theme on many different levels. The capitalism is really at the core of a lot of the difficulties that we experience in our environment. A lot of the problems are caused by capitalism in the environment. So I feel my work speaks to that. It was really funny to see everybody looking down in the cardboard box yesterday at the opening. I was like laughing and enjoying with pleasure, seeing people engage with the work and physically sort of bending over the box, looking down into it. I think there's kind of an intimacy with that, with the connection with this work. Like it's the opposite of the sort of the cinematic screen, you know, that makes the work sort of more grandiose, because I often do show on, you know, my work on cinematic screens or cinematic scale. So this is very intimate, and yeah, I really liked the intimacy of the audience engagement with it yesterday. So it was very enjoyable to watch that. And because so much of my work is performance art, it's normally people are watching me. Of course, they're not watching me; they're watching a version of me. But yesterday, to observe people watching my work like outside of myself was delightful.